Could you survive a winter where the very air itself turns against you? What if breathing became a fight for your life, where every lungful of frozen wind was quietly trying to kill you? This is not a story about a storm. It is a story about survival at 30 below zero. Picture the Missouri River Valley in the dead of January. The temperature has crashed to 40 degrees Celsius, and Arctic air is pouring down off the top of the world, running 1,600 kilometers in a single unbroken line across the open plains. There are no trees to slow it. There are no hills to hide behind. On ground this flat, wind is not weather, it is a blade, and anything caught above the surface either bends or it dies. And yet, beneath a low mound of frozen earth that looks like nothing more than a swelling in the snow, a fire is burning. Step inside, and the entire world changes. A child sleeps on a raised platform layered with heavy buffalo hides. A woman grinds corn in a slow, steady rhythm, and the sound fills the quiet room. The walls do not move. No draft touches the skin. Outside, the wind screams. Inside, life simply continues. But here is what almost no one ever learns. Hidden inside this warm, safe shelter was an invisible killer, one that could take an entire family in their sleep, and we will get to exactly what it was. There was also a people who never walked through a door to come home. They climbed down through the roof instead, and the reason why is stranger than you would ever guess. And the person who owned this house, who designed it, who had the final word on how every beam was laid, that may surprise you most of all. Because this is no accident of nature. This is not some lucky cave. This is a survival machine, engineered by the Mandan, the Hidatsa, and the Arikara of the northern plains, and by the Salish peoples far to the west. And to understand how it worked, you first have to stop fighting the cold and go down into the earth. Here is the first thing they understood that we tend to forget. The temperature itself was never the real enemy. The wind was. On the open plains, with nothing to break its path, moving Arctic air strips heat from a body faster than still air ever could. At -30, exposed skin can freeze in under a minute. Metal turns brittle enough to snap. Your own breath crystallizes before it fully leaves your mouth. So the question was never simply how to get warm. It was how to escape the wind without abandoning everything you had built. And for some people, there was an easy answer: you run. A nomadic family could take down a tipi, pack it, and raise it again a few hours later, chasing shelter and following the herds. But the Mandan, the Hidatsa, the Arikara, these were farmers. Their corn, their squash, their beans grew in the river valleys, and you cannot carry a harvest on your back across a frozen plain. They could not flee the cold, because they could not leave their food. Their food grew out of the earth, so they went into the earth themselves. And what they found down there was a secret hiding in plain sight. While the air above ground swings through violent extremes, blistering summers and killing winters, the ground below stays remarkably calm. Dig down just 2 meters, and the temperature holds steady between 4 and 10 degrees Celsius all year long, no matter what the sky is doing. Think about what that means. When it is -30 outside, you are not starting your fight for warmth at -30. You are starting it at +5. The amount of heat you have to create is cut by more than half. You are no longer trying to climb 70 degrees, only 15. And in that moment, something quietly profound happens in the story of human survival. These people stopped trying to defeat winter and started to negotiate with it. This was not a small idea. At Keatley Creek in British Columbia, archaeologists have uncovered the remains of pit houses 20 meters across, homes so vast they sheltered entire extended families, generation after generation, all built on this single, patient truth about the ground beneath our feet. But a hole in the ground is not a home. The genius was in what they built on top of it. Start with the skeleton. At the center of an earth lodge stood 4 massive cottonwood posts, each as thick as a man's body, planted in a square and carrying heavy horizontal beams overhead. From that core, rafters spread outward like the spokes of a wheel, resting on a second ring of shorter posts near the walls. And here is the part that stops people cold. There were no nails, no metal fasteners of any kind. The tops of the posts were forked, carved to cradle the beams they held, and when the builders piled tons of earth onto the roof, that enormous weight pressed straight down and locked every joint tighter. The structure did not resist gravity, it used it. The heavier it became, the stronger it grew. Then came the layers, and this is where the real artistry lived. First, A woven lattice of willow branches was spread across the rafters not for warmth, but to let the timbers breathe, keeping moisture out so the wood would not rot. Over the willow went a thick blanket of dried prairie grass, trapping air in 1,000 tiny pockets, working exactly like the fiberglass insulation in a modern wall. And over that, heavy blocks of sod, 30 to 60 centimeters deep, not insulation, but mass. All day, the fire poured heat into that earth, and all night, as the flames died down, the earth slowly gave it back. The lodge held a steady temperature, while the world outside swung wildly. In the most literal sense, the earth breathed warmth. But warmth is nothing without air, and a sealed room with a fire is a death trap. So they engineered the house to breathe on its own. A long, low entrance tunnel let heavy cold air sink and pool near the floor, where it stayed. Inside, hot air rose to the domed peak and escaped through a smoke hole, and that rising column created suction, a low-pressure zone that pulled fresh air in through the tunnel. A deflector wall split that incoming stream and sent it circling the room, soaking up heat from the earthen walls before it ever reached the fire. The flames did not just warm the air, they pumped it. And this finally explains the strangest habit of all the Salish people to the west often did not use a door. They climbed down through the roof. Because a door at ground level is a wound in a heated house, every time it opens, warm air escapes out the top, while cold air floods in along the floor. A roof entrance solved both problems at once. It lost almost no heat, and it stayed clear even when snow buried the walls under several meters. Every part of this system existed to keep people breathing warm, living air. Which makes it all the more chilling that this very same system of breath could, under the wrong conditions, quietly turn into a machine for killing everyone inside. Life inside the lodge organized itself around a single truth. The coldest air always sinks to the lowest point. Beds were built as raised wooden platforms along the outer wall, layered with buffalo robes, and often a hide canopy was draped overhead, a small tent within the larger room that trapped a sleeper's own body heat and held it close. A person could sleep in real warmth long after the central fire had burned down to embers. But that same fire, the beating heart of the home, hid the invisible killer I promised you at the start. Its name was carbon monoxide. When wood was damp, it burned incompletely and released the gas in dangerous amounts. And in the middle of a blizzard, when the smoke hole was sealed too tightly against the storm, that colorless, odorless gas could rise silently while a family slept and never let them wake. No written records tell us how many were lost this way, but the danger was absolutely real. Knowing how to keep a clean, dry, properly vented fire was not a household preference. It was survival knowledge, passed down because the alternative was death. And warmth came from more than flame. On the coldest nights, the hidatsa brought their horses inside. A single resting horse throws off 1,500 to 2,000 BTUs an hour, roughly a 500-watt space heater that never switches off. 3 or 4 animals near the entrance added up to nearly 2 kilowatts of free, living heat. The same quiet logic appears across the cold world. The Vikings sheltered cattle inside their longhouses, and Swiss farmers built their homes directly above the barn. But the deepest surprise in this story is not about heat at all. It is about power, because among the Mandan and Hidatsa, the lodge did not belong to a man, it belonged to a woman. She owned the house, the land it stood on, and the gardens around it. And when it was time to build, she hired the architect, an older woman who carried the engineering knowledge across generations. The house rose through feasting. The owner fed and rewarded everyone who labored, so that surplus food became labor, and labor became a home. Wealth here was never meant to be hoarded, it was meant to move. And that same reverence reached all the way to the sky. The smoke hole was not just a vent, it was a solar calendar, its shifting shaft of light marking the solstices and equinoxes. The round floor was the earth, the domed roof was the heavens, and the 4 central posts were the 4 directions, tied to the morning and the evening stars. When people sang over a new lodge, praying for its strength, they were not merely being superstitious. The ritual demanded that the house be inspected, honored, and repaired. Belief was engineering, wearing the clothing of the soul. To see just how brilliant these homes were, you only have to look at what came next. When European settlers arrived in the 1700s and 1800s, they built what looked like proper houses, straight walls, shingled roofs, rising proudly above the ground. But they were thermal disasters. Wind knifed through the gaps between the logs. Heat bled out through the roofs, and the fireplace, that great symbol of a warm home, actually pulled warm air up the chimney and sucked cold drafts in to replace it. Settlers burned staggering amounts of wood just to stay miserable, shivering inside houses that the Mandan would have found unlivable. The Earth Lodge asked for almost nothing by comparison. The soil did half the work, the ventilation recycled its own heat, and the low mound simply let the wind pass over it. This was not primitive building. It was the truest kind of sustainable technology, using only what the land offered, wasting almost nothing. And then it ended. The climate shifted. The great bison herds moved on. European diseases and forced removals swept through the villages, and one by one they fell silent. The roofs caved in, the mighty posts rotted, and the pits slowly filled with soil. But they never fully disappeared. Look at the northern plains today, and you can still find them, faint circular shadows pressed into the earth, the ghost outlines of homes, arranged in patterns that map out entire communities and the trade routes that once connected them. Because in the end, these people did something we have almost forgotten how to do. They did not conquer winter, they joined it. Survival, they understood, was never really about strength. It was about observation, humility, and knowing when to stop fighting and let the earth itself do the work. The ground beneath your feet was never just a foundation, it was a partner. They turned the earth into a cradle, and the howling wind above them became, at last, irrelevant. If stories like this, the ones that reveal how our ancestors quietly outsmarted a world trying to kill them, are what you're here for, then subscribe, because there are more waiting for you already. And before you go, tell me this in the comments. What forgotten technique from the past do you believe still holds an answer we haven't yet seen?